at the end of our meeting for those of you who are interested in watching it. Elizabeth, take it away, please.
Okay, so I hope Dave is up there somewhere. I haven't been messing around or looking at the participants, so I haven't seen him. So Dave, are you there somewhere?
He's there. I saw him.
You saw him? Okay.
I'm here, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. I'm here.
Okay. Oh, hi, Dave.
Hi.
Hi, good. Okay, so Dave is actually an international sports marketing executive. And he's worked on 2 consecutive winning Olympic bids, which is quite an achievement. He has about 25 years experience in acquiring sponsors for major international sports initiatives and professional teams in Canada and around the world. But obviously that's not why he's here tonight, because we're a naturalist society. So Dave is here wearing his other hat, which is as the author of a very successful book, Show Me the Honey, Adventures of an Accidental Apiarist. And that's about his experience as a beekeeper, the good ones and the bad ones, because he had a bit of both. He started out as a novice beekeeper, but with some help from his sister and his beekeeping girlfriend. And obviously he had to join some clubs, et cetera, but we'll let him talk about that. So how did Dave end up as a beekeeper? Well, his sister looked around the area where Dave's houseboat is in Ladner and decided this was prime foraging habitat for bees. And so she gave him a gift, a rather different gift, a beehive and 15,000 bees. And so Dave had pretty quick learning curve here to learn how to look after bees on a houseboat. As you'll hear from Dave, beekeeping is not an easy hobby. It's obviously important because bees are such an important part of the ecosystem. No bees cuts back on the pollination, cut back on the food supply. What I would mention, if you pick up his book, which is worth reading, I can tell you that because I have read it. It has a foreword by Rick Hansen. What's happening? I'm sorry, somebody say something there? Sorry, I was getting some feedback there. Anyway, the book has a foreword by Rick Hansen. Now, traveling with Rick Hansen across Canada, his sponsorship coordinator for the Man in Motion tour, was actually the beginning of Dave's career in sponsorship sales. So this nice little foreword by Rick Hansen in his book. As I say, it is worth reading. And Dave probably won't thank me for telling you this, because I'm sure he'd like you to buy the book, but you can actually get it through the Fraser Valley Regional Library. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave now to tell us all about his adventures in beekeeping.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that introduction. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here tonight to the Delta Naturalists. And one of the main reasons I'm happy to be here is because you guys probably you're in my neighborhood. You kind of know where I live. And I think that it sets the stage for my story a bit better, knowing that I'm not some guy from far off. I'm on River Road. And when you go along that stretch on River Road, heading out towards the old Westham Island Bridge, you can't really see there's a dike there on your right-hand side as you're heading from the village of Ladner out towards Westham Island. And a lot of people don't know, but on the other side of that dike, there's about 30 or 40 float homes. The view is magnificent. And 14 years ago, as Elizabeth mentioned, I was an executive with the Vancouver Canucks, and I was the vice president of the Vancouver Grizzlies and involved in the Olympic Games and really, really busy lifestyle in downtown Vancouver. I bought one of those float homes. I thought it'd be a good place to relax on the weekends. And then I ended up living in it full time. And for 14 years, I've been a resident of Ladner. But it's true what Elizabeth said is, I wasn't into bees. There are certainly more qualified speakers that you could have. You could have people that university PhDs in entomology that know a lot more than me. I knew nothing about it. My sister was out on my front deck one evening and she said, Dave, there's Elliott Island and Kirkland Island, and there's all these potato farms around you. She said, would you mind if I dropped a hive of bees off on your float home? And the operative phrase is, she said, I'll do all the work. And so I said, well, of course I don't mind. What am I going to do? Say no? I'll do all the work. Great. Do what you want. Give me a jar of honey every 3 or 4 months and put them there, So that's how it began. And, I don't, it's not like I really like bees or I had a real interest in bees. It just kind of happened. But then as, as time went on, I met a woman, my girlfriend, Jeannie, and she kept bees. So all of a sudden my world is surrounded by women and bees are all female anyways. And I started observing them. And I've always enjoyed writing as a hobby. And some of you may find it interesting that live in Ladner or know the area, that all my writing for this book was done in one place, was done at Stir Coffee House. It's a lovely place to go. I'd go there in the morning and sit for a couple hours by the fake fireplace with 3 cups of coffee and bash out more and more words. And then I met somebody that knew about book publishing. And I asked her, I said, how many, I'd never written a book before. I said, I'm writing a book about bees. My sister dropped a hive off in my float home. I observe them every day. I'm looking at them. I'm curious. Now, how many words does a book have to be? And she said, about 80,000, And so I thought, well, that's a good goal. Well, it took me 2.5 years to write the book. Oh my goodness. Somebody else, Anne, I just, while I was listening to your meeting, Anne mentioned she had a book available, Black Bond Books, and so she knows that it takes forever to write a book properly. And then it took me a year to find a publisher, so we're talking about, then I found a publisher after a year, cold calling, knocking on doors. I'm a salesperson. I'm not afraid to knock on doors and cold call and try to persuade people to publish my book. Then it took the publisher a year to publish it. So what began 4.5 years ago has now come to fruition. But couldn't have picked a worse time to publish a book. The book came out early March. COVID hit mid-March. And that's just the way things are in life. That's bad luck, because so much of book promotion is events. So I put that in the bad luck column. Just tell you a little bit about the book publishing business before I get into talking about bees, because I think I love this story. But the book publishers, a professional publishing company called Touchwood Editions, here's the book. They're used to publishing them, promoting them. They want to make money, sell books. Books are kind of a tough business nowadays. So they send out 100 copies to different publications, magazines, radio and TV stations, people that review books. And they got an inquiry. They phoned me up one day and they said, I don't want to get you too excited, but the New York Times, the New York Times have asked for another copy of the book. And, we sent them the advanced reader copy, and the New York Times phoned us, and we've been publishing books for 25 years. We've never had a review in the New York Times. We don't want to get your hopes up, but we're sending them another copy. So I thought that there must have been a door that couldn't be held open properly in the New York Times building. Maybe there was a draft going through the building, and my book had come. It was just perfect. And they just needed another copy for that. So I kind of forgot about it. But 4 months after I got that notice, the New York Times ran a review of the book, which is really, for a first-time writer, a guy that sits in the corner of Stir, tapping away at some keyboards, I was very, very pleased. So I'm not begging you to buy the book, because we were very fortunate. We ended up hitting 1%, top 1% of Amazon sales worldwide. People were reading more because it's a pandemic. The book's for sale globally, and the New York Times ran an article on it. So I'm as pleased as punch. I'm really unhappy, though, that I've been unable to go out and make personal presentations and speak to clubs like yours in person. But I was delighted when you asked me to do this Zoom presentation. So it's kind of like the theme of the book. I mean, it was just luck. I mean, so here I'm given this beehive, and you gotta feed them. You've got to keep them warm. You've got to nurture them. You've got to care for them. You've got to be at one with them. It's not like stamp collecting, or it's not like other hobbies that I've had. This hobby has interrupted vacations. This hobby has been expensive. This hobby has been painful. I'm going to show you a picture in a while of getting stung in the face. And this hobby often reaps very, very little honey. Okay. And that's what kind of tongue in cheek, why I called the book Show Me the Honey. Because the sad thing is, and then the final chapter, the whole book is self-deprecating. You can probably tell by my style here. I'm poking fun at myself. I'm, talking about all the mistakes I've made. I'm coming up against insurmountable problems that I overcome chapter after chapter. The final chapter ends on a serious note that the bees are in trouble. And half of the beehives that hobby beekeepers keep, that people like myself keep, or people that belong to clubs and are more serious about it, die every year. And there's something called colony collapse disorder, which I'll get into a little bit later on, but it's very hard to be successful. It's very hard to get any honey. And I would look at all the work that I would put in, month after month, canceling vacations to come home to feed the bees, going through the hive, inspecting it, making sure my queen was alive, replacing my queen. I'll get into all the stuff in my presentation. And at the end of the season, I might get 10 jars of honey. And, I'm a business guy. I had spent maybe $1,000 or $2,000 on this hobby. You got 10 jars. Now, it is wonderful to give somebody a jar of honey when you go over to their house for dinner. All the people here are, used to being invited over to someone else's house occasionally. We used to be doing that before COVID. And you bring a nice bottle of wine or something as a gift. Well, I'm very popular with my friends. I'm invited over and I bring a jar of honey and I tell them a bit about my bees, and it's nice and convivial. And as I leave, I'm thinking to myself, well, I only got 10 jars this year and it cost me $2,000 worth of equipment. I think they would have been happier if I'd given them $200, So then I'd think about, is it really good for the environment? I'm kind of a skeptical by nature, and I'm going to get into some questions I'm going to ask, in terms of people. They always say to me, they say, "Oh, Dave, it's just so wonderful what you're doing. It's just so good for the environment and you're saving the bees." I'm totally into that. I'm not going to deny it, but there's a backside to beekeeping, and that's really what we do is we trick them into making more honey than they need. And then we steal it. And then we just harvest it away from them and feed them sugar water. I mean, for heaven's sakes, what could be more unhealthy than a big tank of sugar that we give them to survive the winter? And having them live in those boxes. I mean, that's not how bees want to live in a high rise, that like a downtown condo in Yaletown, and they're meant to live up. So there's a lot of things about beekeeping that in my book, in jest, I poke fun at. Now, aside from being a sports marketing guy, I also teach university courses in international sports marketing. I enjoy teaching, and I always find that my the points I'm trying to make teaching are better made through humor, through stories with tension. And through this book, it's not just all fun, funny, dumb stories. I'm trying to teach people about the nature of bees, how fascinating they are, how you keep them, the pitfalls. So I think that by reading through the 18 chapters, you'll get a sense for what beekeeping is all about and how fascinating these little bugs are. So let's just go on to the next slide, please, Jim. And then I'm just going to continue talking on that. And that is obviously the book and my picture on the cover, being surrounded by bees. If we could just advance the slide, please, Jim.
I'm working on it. Just a second.
No problem. No problem. So,
Dave, are you okay with leaving all your questions till the end of your presentation?
Whatever you think would be best, Elizabeth. Yeah, let's do that. Let's leave them till the end. I'll talk for about another half hour or so, and then we'll leave 10 or 15 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
people.
I've already talked a bit about the New York Times, which I've been reading since I was 12 years old. It's my favorite newspaper, so I was thrilled to be in that. It was in the July issue, and the next slide, I believe, might be of my float home, which I've already told you a bit about. You could just advance that. There it is. That's an old, believe it or not, an old barge that used to take sawdust up and down the Fraser River. Somebody turned it upside down, dried it out, built a four-bedroom home for a family of 5 people. And I took it over as a bachelor back in 2007. I moved into it and totally gutted it and made it all yuppie. And it just floats in the most idyllic, beautiful spot on planet Earth. I mean, oh my God, it is so nice out there. So Miriam, my sister, drops the bees off, and there's, this is the plan. Her and her husband are going to come over with this massive hive, 15, 20,000 bees in there. A beehive in the summertime will grow to about 40 or 50,000 bees. we're talking about a standard hive. It looks like a filing cabinet, 4 or 5 boxes. In the spring and fall, the hive might be 15 or 20,000. In the wintertime, it'll go down to about 5,000 bees. Bees don't hibernate. They flap their wings like crazy to create heats. I'm going to get into that in a minute. But they drop the hive off and we put it on the deck there. You can see the deck, and actually the back deck. It'll be another picture. She's driving out with them. You move bees at nighttime. It's hard to move bees, okay? She's taking a beehive from Burnaby, and her and her husband, Len, seal all the little holes, put their bee suits on, put the beehive inside of their van. It's quite a big deal to move a hive of bees. You do it at nighttime. And you can either move a beehive 3 or 4 miles, in which case the bees recalibrate where they are. Like, it's very, very complex for a bee to leave a hive, go out and forage, and come back, find its way back to where it came from. And because of that, their GPSs are geared to follow the sun, take coordinates, make calculations, and when they will fly up to 5 kilometers away. Okay, so many of you probably have had my bees. If you live in Ladner or Tawasin, my bees may have visited your gardens. No, I'm not going to give you any free honey, but my bees may have foraged in your neighborhood. When they leave the beehive, they need to find their way back. Okay, so rule number 1 that I learned very early on is never move your hive a few feet. You can move your hive a few inches, they'll find it. Or you can move it 300-400 miles, then they recalibrate. But if you move your hive 10 feet and the bees are out, when they come back, guess where they go? They go to where the hive was when they left. They don't know it was moved. Beehives aren't supposed to move. So Miriam and her husband Len are coming out to my float home that night, and I'm anticipating their arrival, and Jeannie and I are sitting there. And I said to Jeannie, I said, this is not going to work because my float home, the Fraser River is on a tidal estuary, and my float home moves up and down 15 feet when it's a full moon outside. A lot of stuff's going on with tides, and I can come home. And when I leave, the ramp is like that. When I come back, the ramp's like that. Like the float home has gone down 15 feet. So I said to Jeannie, I said, this is whacked out. I mean, to leave some bees on the back of a floating home, it's just not going to work. And I phoned my sister and she says, too late. She said, we're on our way over. So we put the bees back there, very skeptical. And Miriam notified the Richmond Beekeeping Association, which is the bee club that I later joined. And it created a real amount of discussion as, here's this guy, he's living in a float home, he's keeping bees. So first of all, I told you that only half of the hives will survive the winter. Okay, only half the hives will make it. Most of them die. There you go. Thank you very much for doing that, James. My float home in the winter. You can actually see the beehive in the back. And if you go to the bottom left-hand corner of the float home, you'll see kind of 3 boxes there. But we don't think they're going to survive because the float home is moving up and down, and how can they possibly find their way back to where they started from? Now, they do something called the waggle dance. When I heard about this, it just blew me away. The bees go out, and there's forager bees that find out where the great foraging is, where the good plants are, okay? And after she has found that, the bee will fly back to the hive and dance in a figure 8, doing something called the waggle dance. You can't make this stuff up. The axis of the figure 8 points the direction where the honey is, okay? The velocity of her wing speed indicates the distance away that it is to other bees. I've read a whole book on this. Karl von Frisch discovered it in Vienna in the 1880s. This is a concept, the waggle dance, whereby bees communicate to one another where the foraging is. So I'm wondering, how are these little bees going to, adapt? Because when they leave in the morning, they come back and tell the other girls where the honey is, but the base has moved, so all their coordinates will be off. So these bees from the start are doomed. They're not going to make it. They're on a barge in the middle of the Fraser River, where it's colder in the water than it is on the land. The winds are much worse here than they are in some farm, in Ladner. So not only, here's the cool part of the story, not only in the first year did the bees survive, they made it through the winter, they produced 100 pounds of honey out of that little box there. And my sister, it's her hive. You know, she dropped it there. She, in all fairness to her, she did all the work, and she came by every couple of months and fed them and came by and nurtured them and made changes and, you know, insulated the hive. And I always watched and I was interested. I even bought a bee suit so I could look inside with her, you know. And then she took the honey and she entered it in the BC Bee Producers Association annual meeting for the best tasting honey in the province. She entered it in the competition. And my damn honey won second best tasting honey in the province. So we got 100 pounds. So I'm just blown away. It's kind of like the New York Times. Like I read a book, it gets written about it in the New York Times. I can't believe it. I go, this isn't that bad, you know? A pretty good hobby. I got some notoriety. People, I create a controversy. My bees survived. Let's do it again. So she says, they're yours, Dave. She says, I'm not going to drive all the way. She lives in Burnaby. I'm not driving all the way out to your float home. You've shown some interest. You can read some books. You can join the club, take some courses, and you can become a beekeeper, you know? So I'm on my own. So that's what the book is about me accidentally getting into it. The first chapter is called Waggle Dancing on a Tidal Estuary, where I go into more detail about what I just talked about. And then in self-deprecating terms, I go on to draw examples of my real life and try to make sense of it within beekeeping. So when I've worked in international sports marketing, I was very much involved in the acquisition of bringing the Olympics to Vancouver. I was on the bid committee, went over to Prague, pitched the IOC to bring them here. Then after we won, I went over to London, England, and I was involved with the pitch to have London win the Olympics. And as part of that, I got to, I'm not bragging, but it's just the goofiest thing. But I was invited to Buckingham Palace to meet Queen Elizabeth. So one of my chapters is about comparing the real queen to my queen bee, you know. My queen bee is twice as big as the others. Queen Elizabeth is twice as small when I met her, you know. My queen bee, when I look at her, she's surrounded by other bees feeding her and taking care of her and looking after her. And the meeting at Buckingham Palace, we were at a reception, and the queen was surrounded by people looking after her, feeding her and protecting her. My queen is responsible for the future of the hive. The queen, you know, she has relatives that have an heir and a spare, and she's responsible for the future of the Commonwealth. So it's kind of a funny chapter about comparing the real queen to my queen. And then I'll talk about the queen's sex life, not Queen Elizabeth's sex life. Talk about the queen bee and how she mates. Oh my God, 300 feet in the air, 15 or 17 suitors having intercourse with her, her getting 2 million spermatozoid in her, enough sperm to last for 4 years of laying eggs. And I compare it to my dating life when I was a teenager in a self-deprecating way. But I find everything about these creatures fascinating. I'm just blown away by the intricacy of how they communicate to one another, how they achieve things, the hierarchy, it is such an advanced species of animal. Are they all individual bees, or are they collectively an organism? Okay, next slide, please, Jim. That's I'm a lousy carpenter. This hairdo, that's me. This hairdo, by the way, is COVID. I've stopped cutting my hair on March the 13th, and I'll get it cut as soon as I get a vaccine. I'm protesting. That's me making bee boxes. You have to build them, and that's a typical frame where 10 frames go inside of that box, and about 2,000 or 3,000 bees can live in there. Next slide, please. There it is. That is like, when things are working in there, you know, that's a honey cranking machine. You get 100 pounds out of that thing, you're happy. Man, oh man, that didn't happen too often. For the next 3 years, I got skunked and my hive died every year, and I didn't get hay. I'm keeping bees for about 8 or 9 years now. I'm a bit of a cartoonist, so I did the artwork on the outside of the hives. One hive is called The Sting, and then God Save the Queen is another chapter in my book. And these are all chapters in my book that I wrote on this, that I drew cartoons of on the side of the hive. Okay, next slide, please. And that's just what I told you, some of the chapters in the book. Just go to the next one. I think we're going to get to let's get to the good stuff, the pictures of the bees. there are the three different, there's basically, I mean, there's basically three different types of bees. Beekeeping 101, there is the worker bee. They're all female. 80 or 90% of the hive is worker bees. There are drones. They're useless. They eat. They don't contribute. They don't forage. They eat. They sleep. They eat. They sleep. Then they go out once a year to mate with the queen. And if they're lucky enough to impregnate her, they have a detachable penis. You're not going to believe this. They copulate in midair. The queen will go out on her mating flight. A drone will attach to her. They'll copulate. Then he will pull back, and his penis is released within her, and it tears all of his guts out, and he falls dead to the ground right after mating. There's 20,000 of them. There's 10 or 20,000 of them. They're trying to mate with the queen, though. The ones that don't mate with the queen go back to the hive, and they're about as welcome as drunken sailors. Ladies don't let them back in, and they will die. So the life of a drone is strictly to mate. They don't do any work. You got your worker bee. On the top there, you've got your drone bee, and you've got your queen, and everything revolves around. I mean, just an egg-laying machine. The average bee lives for about, a month and a half, 2 months. In the summertime, they live for shorter. In the wintertime, they'll live longer. Queen bee will live 3 or 4 years, and all she does is lay eggs from that one mating flight. So again, every time I get into the biology of it and the serious stuff, I find it quite boring to read the way that these textbooks are written. And I felt a book with humor and told it within the context of a lot of analogies would be quite popular. So that's a picture that I took with me, 3 bees behind me. Next slide, please, Jim. And that's a zinger in the face. Oh my God, that hurts. Whew. You do all the measures to have protective equipment, yet the bees can penetrate the canvas in the suits. And I'm going to read you a short excerpt from my book about a bee getting inside of my suit, crawling up my nose, crawling into my ear. And that was when I got stung in the face like that. You usually get stung. Let's say it happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it hurts like hell. You stop, sit down, have a glass of water, collect yourself, go back, continue beekeeping. At dinner time, you got a little bit of a red mark. You go to bed. The next morning is when it hits. The next morning, you wake up and you look like the Elephant Man. And it's often happened at inopportune times when I was conducting my business career, and I'd come into important meetings with the IOC in boardrooms with the president of the Olympics, and I'd look like that. I got a little bit of explaining to do. So next slide, please. And to protect our hands, we use leather gloves. All of this equipment. One of these beekeeping suits is going to cost you $300. Next slide, please. That is my queen died. So I'm telling you, everything depends on your queen laying eggs. When she stopped laying eggs, the bees will try to produce another queen on their own, and if they can't, the hive will shortly die afterwards because of the cycle of life. But you can go out and buy a queen. And so I made some. It always happens when you're about to go on a vacation. We were about to go on a holiday. My queen died the day before we were going. Find out my queen's not there. So I got to go make arrangements to buy a queen. And that's how you transport a queen. There are people that breed queen out in the street somewhere. He met me out in Vancouver, in East Vancouver. And he hands me this little thing. He wants $50 for it, for a queen bee. And I need the queen because I'm going on holidays. My whole hive's going to die. And so I agreed to pay him $50 for a queen that he has bred. He has a little business where he breeds queen bees. And he hands me that. He says, to keep it warm, this is a true story. Just to keep it warm, put it in your pants, put it in your pocket. Well, I don't want to put an insect in my front pants. I mean, it's pretty close to my private parts. So I'm in my little sports car. I got this queen bee in my front pocket. And so I sped all the way home, and I got pulled over by the police. I didn't bother saying anything, but it's all in the book. Transported the new queen into the hive. She dies three weeks later. I get back from my holidays. She's dead. Go buy another queen, another $50. It vanishes. It flies away. So now I'm $100 into queens. No honey. I've been worried about it my whole holiday. My girlfriend's really mad at me because I left it to the last minute to check. So that's one of the chapters about the queen bee. Next slide, please. That's a queen cage. That's what you transport a queen in. There you go. You can see the water. You can see frames. If we go to the next slide, we will see the composition of a frame, I think, please. Yes, we'll see either capped brood. In other words, the bees will lay an egg, put some honey in there, put a wax cap over it, and that's the chamber of birth. It's like a crib. Other one of these 6-sided cells will be used just to store honey. Other cells are used to store pollen. And after you get good at beekeeping, something I have never done yet, I'm not good at beekeeping. After you'll be able to read the frame and determine the health of the hive by looking at new eggs, looking at pollen, looking at honey, looking at the shape, looking at the pattern, of the egg laying. And that's what my sister Miriam and my girlfriend Jeannie are good at. And I'm getting better at it, but it takes years to become a good beekeeper. So that is a nice pattern of brood. The next slide is of a chamber. When the queen is being hatched, she needs a bigger chamber. And I think that's a queen cell.
Wow.
There's probably I bet you anything. I just checked, you have 50 members watching tonight. I counted before the meeting. They're kind of like the little cells in a beehive, but they're each one of these little boxes here on Zoom is a person. I'm certain there's people that know a lot more about beekeeping than me. And that's either a water cup cell or the beginning of a queen cell. The bees have to build a bigger chamber for the queen because she's bigger when a queen is born. It's all in the book. And the next shot is of just some more cell patterns that I find interesting. I've got a very interesting chapter on enemies of the bees. Ants, skunks, bears, raccoons. But the biggest enemy, we're going to show the next slide, is something called the mites, the Varroa destructor mite. And those little black dots represent mites. And they're blood-sucking vampires. And they connect themselves onto the side of a bee. Like they're little tiny, they're about the size of a piece of pepper, okay? But the size of a piece of pepper to a bee would be about the, I use this analogy in the book, would be about the size of a running shoe to a human being. So imagine if you're doing your work and you got 3 running shoes on you and they're sucking blood out of you all day long. Well, that's what the Varroa destructor mite does. A couple interesting things about this parasite. It was only introduced in North America about 20 or 30 years ago. It's a relatively new phenomenon. And it is the #1 killer of beehives. If you have mites, they will just get worse and worse. They will lay eggs within the little cells where the baby bee eggs are. And as the pupa forms, the mites are also forming and breeding in there. So the bees are born covered in mites. And then bees that are mites in. And I spend a lot of my time fumigating my hive with a deadly gas, vaporizing them. We use something called oxalic acid, and it kills the mites, but it doesn't kill the bees. And we take a battery out of a car and hook up a couple of wires and put this oxalic acid on a metal plate, stick it in the beehive, plug all the holes, and we gas them. Mites are animals too. I mean, just because they don't produce honey and they don't look cute, we kill them. So I raise all these questions, ethical questions about, it's too bad that mites don't have a value to us. Otherwise they could live, but we hate mites. Beekeepers want to destroy mites and have mite-free hives. But when you hear the term colony collapse disorder, people talk about monoculture being a problem, neonicotinoids, pesticides, everyday pollution. People will talk about the radio waves from your cell phone. All of these things have weakened the bees, so their defense mechanism against mites have been weakened. And once you get mites, your hive is on a downhill trend. And look how many I had. Jeannie, my girlfriend, would do the same thing. These have all fallen off the bees onto the bottom board that I keep in the hive. This is a white bottom board. On the very bottom of the hive is this board. And after you gas them, the mites fall off and fall onto this board. And I had hundreds. Jeannie has like 5 or 6, I'd count 100, 200 mites. So that's why I'm not a very good beekeeper. Next slide, please, Jim. And that's what we feed them. Can you imagine something as, crazy as this? When I go to buy sugar at Save On Foods in Ladner, I have to pull my little Miata sports car right to the front because I buy 4 big bags of that. I don't want to, and that's what I take home to melt down. It takes a lot of work. It's sticky work. First time I did it, you boil the water, you put the sugar in the exact amounts, and you've stolen all their honey. You got 30, 40, 100 pounds of honey. You're feeling good. Now they're going to starve to death over the winter. So you've got to feed them sugar water, and you got to get the right mixture. And it's like 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. And the first time I did it, I boiled the water and I forgot to let it cool down. And I put it out to feed them, and I burnt all their proboscises off, and I killed a bunch of them. People were shocked that I'm so stupid. No, you got to let the sugar water cool down. But I was just learning. Okay, but that's a great shot to remind me of again, big expense. You gotta buy the acid to kill them. You got to buy the machine to kill them. The mites. Got to buy sugar to feed them. You got your outfit. We haven't even gotten into jarring the honey yet, and all the expenses there. Okay, so next slide, please. There you go. There's it's another way to feed them. I'm not doing it by water, just putting sugar there. That's not a good idea though. You got to give them water. And the next slide, please. Okay, this is where it gets kind of funny. This is the filet mignon of food for bees. This is called fireweed. And after an area has been forested, the first plant to grow back is this plant. And what also happens in the summertime, I'll get to my point in a second. In the summertime, when the nectar stops flowing, like the nectar flows in May, June, July, it starts to get dry and the plants have less nectar. You can take your bees and move them to a higher elevation where there's nectar still flowing. And this part of the story takes place on Vancouver Island where Jeannie lives, my girlfriend. But every year we take 4 or 5 of her hives and take her to an out-yard way out in the woods, 75 miles out of town. And it's an area that's just been forested, a couple thousand feet up, subalpine. And there's only one flower that grows there, fireweed. And we leave the hives up there for a couple of weeks and they go nuts. They're supercharged. They just bring so much honey back that they fill their little chambers up in 5 or 6 days. You can go up there, keep on emptying them. And the out yard, the only problem is, James, if you want to show the next slide, please. So that's an example of an out yard. We built we cleared all the trees, built a wire fence around there to protect the bees from bears. Okay, if a bear went in there, it would get electrocuted because you all have read Winnie the Pooh and how bears like honey. And in my favorite chapter in the book is a chapter called The Outyard, whereby I help Jeannie take 4 or 5 of her hives. We put them in the back of a truck. We drive for an hour and a half. We set the hive up for a month, and she gets 1,000 pounds of honey. 1,000 pounds, man! Oh man! She sells it. My hive died 3 years in a row. But this outyard story is quite interesting because let's say there's about 30 hives there. Okay, there are, if you counted 1, 2, somewhere behind each other, 30 hives. This is at the beginning. And this is her bee club. 4 or 5 are her hives that I help set up there. We do this every year. And if each hive, to make the math easy, if each hive has 50,000 bees in it, there's 30 of them there, that's literally, no exaggeration, that's 1.5 million bees, okay, flying around. And that's where my costume failed. That's where my zipper became undone and they started crawling all over my face. It's like an Alfred Hitchcock movie. There's nothing more frightening than life. And I'm looking at the Zoom audience here tonight. I'm looking at your ages. You're all around my age. You're in your 50s or 60s mostly, I think, And you're familiar with the Judy Collins song, I've looked at clouds from both sides now. And I think of the song, I've looked at bees from both sides now. Now, if a bee is on your hooded veil on your screen walking, you would have, I'm not exaggerating. I used to do scuba diving, and I remember diving through schools of fish in the tropics, and they're so thick you can't see where you're going. The air is so thick with bees, you can't see where you're going. There's 1.5 million of them. There's at any given time 20 or 30 crawling on the front of your veil, and you're seeing their stomachs. It's not frightening because the veil's there, but the feeling you get the second it sinks in that you're seeing the other side of the bee, you're seeing its wings, you know it's crawling on the inside of your veil. Now, you can't stop and take your veil off and get it because there's 1.5 million bees around. You're wondering how it got in there. So I wrote a chapter called I've Looked at Bees from Both Sides Now. But what I'm talking about is that 1 second where that bee's on the inside. The same feeling you get, until you've had a bee crawl all over your face, you don't know how terrifying it is. And I'll read you this chapter very quickly. Then I'll wrap up my talk. And then it's not a chapter, I'll read you 2 or 3 pages. Then I'll wrap up my talk. And then I think we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. Is that okay? Okay. Bear with me. Few things are more terrifying than having a bee trapped on the inside of the protective veil. You have to remember that once a bee is inside that cramped canvas cavern and crawling on your face, there is 0 chance to get it out. You can't simply unzip the veil and remove the bee because in the outyard, there are too many other bees zooming around. So you just have to whack the invader with your hand, bashing the side of your face as you miss the bee. It keeps buzzing around, getting more and more agitated while trapped within an inch of your sensitive skin. The buzzing noise blasts in your ear the whole time, amplified tenfold by the acoustics in the hooded veil. That seminal moment of realizing that you have a bee in your bonnet is terrifying and shocking. Consider this. While at the outyard, because the air is thick with hundreds of thousands of bees flying around, you will always have between 1 and 2 dozen bees crawling on the outside of the veil. They are 1 inch from your eyeballs, nostrils, and lips. Their 6 legs are facing you, and their tiny stomachs are rubbing against the screen. But you don't have to worry because they're safely on the other side of the protective mesh. They're always there, but not a threat. Then imagine the moment you spot the reverse image of the bee. You spot the back of one. It's crawling on the same mesh with the rest of them, but its wings are facing you. You realize it's on the inside. One day, Jeannie and I were at the outyard, and a nice lady named Judy, who was up there tending her own hive, suddenly stopped, looked hard at me and said, "Dave, don't move. There's something wrong. Don't panic, but you have a bee flying around on the inside of your headgear." She might as well have stuck a revolver to my forehead. I launched into hyperanxiety and lost my breath as she swiftly and deftly grabbed the loose-headed veil and squished the bee inside the mesh to death with her gloved fingers. I narrowly escaped the worst of all stings, a facial sting. The second time a bee snuck past the zipper and got too intimate with my face, I panicked and ran like hell while hitting my head with my hands over and over again. I must have landed a lucky blow because the bee died before it could sting me. The next time I visited the outyard, I carefully put on the suit's hooded veil and tightly zipped it up. Then, as an added precaution, I duct taped the zipper shut. Even with the extra safety measure, a bee penetrated my defenses and got inside. I didn't see this bee, I heard it because it flew directly into my ear. It actually crawled inside my ear. I panicked. Again, I ran like hell, violently slapping myself silly in the ear with both hands and arms. I hit myself so hard, I almost popped my eardrum. Thank goodness I got this bee before it got me. I smacked my ear 20 times in a row with so much force that I squished it somehow. I asked Jeannie to check the back of my suits. Cheap plastic zipper had become undone again. The bee, apparently intent on becoming an ear dweller, had somehow maneuvered through the duct tape, then through the opening in the zipper. Maybe she mistook my ear for a small 6-sided hive cell and sensed that it already had some wax in it. After that string of accident, it was time to take charge. I complained to the bee store where I bought the shoddy suits, and they exchanged it for a new suit with a hardy metal zipper. I could now venture back to the outyard with confidence, knowing my days of facial assaults were behind me. I tugged the new zipper on the suits and could not tear it apart. It was bulletproof. As it turned out, the fourth attack on my face at the outyard, which happened while wearing that new suit, was the scariest and most miserable of them all. It was one of the hottest days in the summer. To this day, I remember it as the day I almost gave up on beekeeping completely. When I'm in my bee suit, I wear jeans and a heavy sweater underneath. Being sealed up in the suit on a hot day, wearing all that clothing and lifting heavy boxes can feel like being inside an oven. The pea-side beads of sweat that flow from your brow down your forehead probably weigh about the same as a honeybee. Come to think of it, the little drops are about the same size as bees too. On those churn your oven up to 350-degree days, gravity pulls the beads of sweat from your forehead down your cheek. On that fateful day, I could feel warm drops of sweat slowly dribbling down my face at about the same speed that a honeybee crawls. I couldn't tell if it was sweat or a bee, or if several bees were crawling on my chins, lips, and nose. 3 times I'd had bees crawling on my face, and it always felt just like this. If Alfred Hitchcock were still alive today, I would send him this book's manuscript and suggest it as a follow-up to his classic movie, The Birds. My horror flick, however, would be called The Bees and would open with a scene of me at the outyard, sweating it out in a paranoid state of incoherent, trembling fright. The camera would pan from the sweltering hot hives to me, pale-faced behind the mesh, and then dissolve into a close-up of a nervous twitch on my glistening cheek just before I scream in horror as a giant bee slowly inserts her massive, razor-sharp stinger into my soft flesh. The scene would be in black and white in slow motion with an eerie solo violin track. I've been stung about 70 or 80 times. I get stung about 10 times a year.
Oh, wow.
It hurts. But maybe the sting makes the honey that much more sweet. I've pondered. If beekeeping was easy and we could just go in there and steal it, bears and skunks and raccoons would have a heyday and human beings would get it much easier. So part of the challenge, of course, I'm poking fun of it, is that bees have the ability to get angry and sting. So there's a little snippet into the outyard. I'll quickly wrap up, and that'll leave us. I'm mindful of your time and my time. It's 9 o'clock. I'm going to quickly wrap up. James, next slide, please. There it is. There's the book. There's the deck of my float home. I have one of my, I don't really sell the honey. I mainly give it away to friends and stuff because I don't get that much, but I make these goofy little labels. This one's called God Save the Queen. It's one of the chapters in my book. And, all in all, the book ends on a serious note in David Suzuki fashion, discussing the scientific future of the bees and what we can do to save them. But the first 15 or 16 chapters, self-deprecating humor, explains a lot of the intricacies of this fascinating creature. I think there might just be one more slide. There is, somebody mentioned Black Bond books are absolutely amazing. That's Holly Morgan. And she is, if you go there to buy the book, I'm a promoter, you can tell. I gave her 30 or 40 little jars of honey, sampler jars. So if you go to Black Bond to buy the book, it's $25 or whatever books sell for, it is 25. She'll give you a free jar of honey. It is authentic, it's my honey. So it's kind of cool. You buy the book, you get a little jar of honey, you can taste the honey. And she was great because of the pandemic. The only one event that I did was in her parking lot this summer, where I met a gentleman from your club. And I'm not sure if he's with us tonight. It was a brief interlude, and he was there. We chatted for 10 minutes, and he said, would you be interested? This is way back in August, I think, or September, that I did this event in the parking lot of Black Bond Books. And he said, Dave, we'd love to have you come speak at our club. It won't be till March. I kind of forgot about it. And now it is who was it that, I'm sorry that I don't remember your name. Who was it that invited me, and are you here tonight? Maybe they gave my name to somebody else, and that's why I'm here. But that's how it began. Black Bond are terrific supporters of local writers, and they have my book. And next slide, please. And anyways, here we are. I virtually meeting all of you. The most wonderful thing about any hobby to me is the connection with other people, the community it creates, having something in common. And for me, the experience of spending 45 minutes with you, recalling one of my favorite topics, telling stories, has been a very enjoyable experience. So my thanks to the Delta Naturalist Society and the good work that you do. I did this talk last time over Christmas to a group online, and I put a Christmas hat on there. So if you don't buy the book, go to the library and get it. And if you don't do that, I hope you learned a little bit about bees, and life becomes more interesting the more things you're interested in. I loved watching the video about the owls, and I think you guys have got a really, really cool little organization going there. So keep up the good work. That's it. Questions, please.
Was that Vicky that you were talking to in front of Black Blonde Books?
No, it was a man. It was a gentleman that, or maybe, no, maybe it was. It was a long time ago.
You know,
Might have been-
Oh,
Was it Vicky? Is Vicky here?
no, actually, it was Sid's wife, Vivian.
Oh,
Vivian.
that's
Okay,
right.
Vivian.
Yeah.
Sid is one of our
Hey, let me,
Sid is one of our co-presidents, and it was his wife, Vivian, that went to your book
Okay.
signing
okay.
and got talking to you. And she told Sid, and Sid said, well, let's ask Dave to come and do his talk. That was
Well,
how it happened.
quick story. So I thought it'd be fun at the book signing to bring a hive, not a hive, bring a box, an empty box frame of bees, no bees in it. Okay. So I pulled a hive out a week before, put a plastic bag around it. There's no bees in it. Brought it with me, put it on the table. So when people come and I sign the book, they can look at a frame. There's no bees in it. Okay. I'm not that stupid. Well, I'm 20 minutes into the signing and there's a bunch of bees flying around, but it's kind of nice because it's the occasional bee. They're attracted to the honey because there was still honey in the frame. Then an hour later, there's so many bees around me, it's creating a nuisance. People want their book signed, and I've created, like, all the bees have been told there's free honey here. So I take the damn hive because it's a nuisance. I put it by London Drugs. Well, by the time I leave 3 hours later, there are about 2,000 or 3,000 bees swarming around
Oh
there.
my
Black Bond's
God.
not happy with me. I've created a real nuisance, and I didn't intend to do this. So I think, what am I going to do? You know, I can't just leave. So I had to go home, get my beekeeping outfit, get a bunch of equipment, and pull it away. You know, I had accidentally created a problem that day.
That's kind of
Any
funny.
questions?
Actually, Annie has a comment here. Did you know that if you have enough bees, you can get a farm exemption for municipal taxes?
You know what? People, I just rent the the moorage where I am, so I don't have a farm and it wouldn't mean anything. But people have asked friends of mine that own acreage. They said, I need to show it's $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 in farm receipts. I don't know what the number is. There is a number the government wants, and you can keep sheep or pigs or anything. And they said, Dave, I could keep bees, and I guess everybody's looking for ways around this, And I think it'd be a good idea if that's what you wanted. You'd have to go out and sell $3,000 worth of honey, which is very doable if you put your mind to it. And I didn't know that. Thank you.
Now, you don't, like the Bee Center on 176 and Fraser Highway,
Yes.
and I can't remember the others, they have bees that they take all over BC, and they have to have somewhere to overwinter them. So if you're in the right, I don't know, longitude, latitude, or heights, or whatever it is, they will give you an exemption certificate for keeping bees on your farm.
Well,
Why do
there
I
you go.
know? I have some siblings that are that way, farm exempt.
Very interesting.
Okay,
Oh,
we have a comment here. Sorry, we have a comment here from Nikki Bokamp. And she's saying, as a fellow beekeeper, I've loved your book, especially the trials and tribulations, which of course we have and are still experiencing.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. There's a
Anything-
great, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask if anyone had questions.
I do. I have a question. When I was, this is some years ago, traveling in Greece, and it was outside of Athens, beside the ocean. And here people had beehives in these just scorching hot summers. And of course, the hillsides are all covered with herbs, wild herbs, marvelous stuff. And then there'd be these beehives. So I sort of learned something how in a culture like that, they use the nature to its advantage. And I don't know, I'm sure they're still doing it, but I was sort of amazed. So going off into the forest like you've done is exactly what people try to do, to find the purest, flowers and everything. I love it, just love it. And I also think, Dave, I think this has been like a mystical, spiritual trip for you. Everything that could, you just have learned so much.
Well,
And-
Alberta,
Yeah.
thank you. What I found interesting in your comments about being in Greece, the Latin name for the honeybee, there's 10,000 kinds of bees I've learned, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we're talking about one very specific type of bee, the honeybee. And its
Yes.
Latin name is the Apis melliferae, okay? And that is a universal bee that is found on every continent of the planet except Antarctica.
Hmm.
So I'm quite confident, Alberta, that the bees that you saw in Greece were the same bees that I keep here. So it's not as if Jeannie and I traveled to India last year and we were interested in beekeepers there, and when we looked at their hives, it's the exact same bee.
Yes.
And that makes the hobby truly universal.
Yes.
And
Yes.
something in common with somebody in Greece or Africa or Australia, because we're keeping the same animal. It's not like a different species in Greece.
Yes, I believe that. And also that the people, I've met people, a beekeeper, this was in Vernon, and he made it, I seem to think he made his living that way, but he had a wonderful area where he had the bees. Once again, it was near a lake. And he said, he so calmly said, the bees have been very good to me. And he seemed to be in also just the most, calm, remarkable state. And of course, I really don't want to be around bees that much. I don't want to get stung, but there's something beautiful about mastering that relationship.
There is. And I haven't. You used a very interesting word, calming. And when you approach a hive, you have to be totally in the moment. You have to move slowly, intentionally. You have to be at one with them. And I'm not. I've usually got my cell phone on. I'm late for a meeting. I've only got 15 minutes to do something that's going to take an hour. And I'm thinking about 19 different things. I drop a tool, bang something, and the bees can sense that I'm not a good beekeeper. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'm good at lots of things in life, but beekeeping is not, I'm not a natural nurturer. And I don't have that calmness and Zen-like approach that my girlfriend and my sister have. They go into the hive and the hive is calm and everything's good and they're really into it. And I treat it more like something I got to do quickly before I get on to my next thing, So you really can learn a lot about yourself being a beekeeper. And when you said that this gentleman in Greece, was a very common person, that's the type of temperament that you need to be a good beekeeper. I don't have it.
Oh, you're getting it. You're getting it.
There's another comment here from Annie saying that, Dave, that you're a wonderful oral educator.
Good, thank you.
You have a very good sense of humor and you have a way of getting a message across.
Well,
Whether it was oral or in your book.
thank you very much for that compliment. I appreciate it.
I have a question.
Yes,
David,
Paul.
are there other predators other than the mites? I mean, like wasps or other things that attack your bees?
Yeah, I've got a chapter in the book about wasps, and wasps will sense a weak hive. So wasps, man, oh man, they're smart. I went to a talk a whole evening just talking about wasps and their hierarchy, but they fly by and they'll sense this hive is weak. then they'll attack it. And the bees have got guard bees on the front. We put a little front door out there where the bees come in and out of. Guard bees, believe it or not, bees are given the job to guard the entrance against wasps coming in. The wasps will overtake the guard bees and make their way in. Then as they leave, they steal honey, they chew the bees to pieces, they kill them. Then they spread a pheromone or a smell so the rest of the wasp hive can come in and finish off the job. And I have had many of my hives killed by wasp invasions. So much so that one day they were invading and I just sat next to the hive in my suits with a vacuum cleaner nozzle as they came by to vacuum them up. And I had a electric fly swatter and my gloves and I was squishing them. And I was late for a meeting downtown, but my hive was being attacked by wasps. And I'd spent a couple $1,000 on this hive. I wanted the honey. And the wasps were attacking right then and there. And I had to be downtown at 2, And so, but I can't leave them. So I went out there with a vacuum cleaner, sat in the deck, and one of those tennis rackets that you get at a dollar store with a battery in it. And I killed 40 or 50 wasps. Then I read the hive is 5,000 or 6,000, like big deal. Like it made no difference. Of course, I came back in the afternoon, the hive was dead. The wasps had killed them. So wasps, mites, ants, those are the ones that we all know about. Skunks and raccoons and bears, bears in the float home. And then a bunch of other viruses, Nosema, American foul brood, all these virus things, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong in a hive.
I see there's another question there from Annie. You're very busy there, Annie. She wants to know if you have made mead.
No. And mead is, of course, wine made out of honey. And I'm very much aware of it. But the spinning of the honey out of the cells into a container, then into jars, is enough to make your house the messiest, most unlivable place on earth, in your bathroom or your kitchen where you do it. You just get sticky crap all over the place. You get bit on your foot and it's all over the house. Jarring honey is like a whole day, And so I'm willing to do that. Making mead would take, now we got to do something else. I just think all of this stuff is so much work.
It's hard to
Any
buy
more
mead.
questions from anyone?
It's hard to find mead.
I
Do you have a question?
have a question. I've heard that these giant hornets from, where are they from, Japan?
Yeah.
Can attack hives as well, and the bees will kill them by overheating them in some manner. Do you know anything about that? I guess that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, when I went to go get the book published, I'll wrap up. And, I knocked on all these publisher doors, and they said, well, why would we publish a book by you? Nothing about bees, And then I submitted the manuscript to another publisher, and he says, no, this is a stupid book about all the mistakes. We want books about people that can do it. Another guy said, do you have a degree? And I go, no, I didn't go to university. I don't know. It's a good book. You should publish it. Well, this publisher actually said to me, he says, I've got 2 manuscripts submitted by PhD entomologists on beekeeping. Why would I publish your book? You've got a point. So I know very little about what the question you just asked me. However, because the publisher was such a aggressive, great publisher, Touchwood Editions, they sent the book to the New York Times. They got me on this national talk show on CTV called The Social, to talk about bees. I'm kind of talking like I am now. It's funny, but I always get asked about the murder hornet. Every interview I've done. I did a dozen CBC radio interviews and did this national thing on The Social and on CTV, and I'm being interviewed by, different American radio and TV. They always, because it was all last summer, they're always asking me. I know nothing about bees, really, about the murder hornets. So I preface it by saying, look, I have never seen one. They're very rare. The spottings, there's been a spotting in Nanaimo. There was a spotting in Blaine. I've read enough about them to be able to comment. And yes, they go in there and they're this big. They're the size of your pinky, and they're killing machines. They just emaciate the hive. Now, I say to people, remember the killer bees? You guys are all my age, and the killer bees were supposed to invade. Well, that never happened. And now was it the killer bees? Is that what they were called? Yeah. And now these are the murder hornets. They come up with these great names, but they're extremely rare. I don't know any beekeeper that's seen one. There's been a couple of sightings. And what you're asking about, Paul, it's not the Apis mellifluae, but there is a type of bee in Japan that will overpower it and they'll create friction and just burn it to death. But our bees aren't that advanced. If we get murder hornets in British Columbia, and there was a nest and a colony in White Rock, there was one in Blaine, there was one in Nanaimo, and I'm joking about this, but I take it seriously. It would really be devastating for murder hornets to invade the area. But I thought it was funny that I'm getting national TV shows and publications asking me, and I kind of said I wouldn't know a murder hornet if it fell out of the sky to my head. I mean, what do I know? But I know enough because I
think
read
you'd
about
learn
them.
in a hurry though if it fell in your head.
I'll learn in a hurry if it gets me free publicity that might sell books. Yeah.
We do have another comment here from Karen Topham. She's saying it was a fabulous presentation. She's looking forward to reading the book. Be happy, BEE.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, is that it for questions?
Great. Well,
I
good
will make
night.
one comment here. I think everybody really enjoyed your presentation, Dave. It was educational, it was entertaining. And I just wanted to make one comment. Knowledge Network on April 20th at 9 o'clock has a program called Honeyland.
Oh,
And this is about a woman who's trying to make a living beekeeping in the Balkans.
I've seen
And
it.
then she has some crazy neighbors move in. Noisy,
It is
rambunctious.
the most beautiful movie. Yeah, I've seen it. It was at the Vancouver International Film Festival 2 years ago. It's amazing photography. It's a wonderful story. Even if you're not interested in bees, it's a beautiful story of human nature and neighbors and conflict and poverty. And it's really a cool. There's lots of good movies about bees, and that's probably one of the best. Really recommend that
And
movie.
this one just sounded really, really interesting. This is a funny point. I usually pick up a lot of books from the library, and sometimes I just go and look for, what I call little cozy mysteries. And the last one that I read was called Murder of a Queen Bee.
That's funny.
Elizabeth, there are 9 comments under chat. Have you seen any of those? At the bottom of the screen.
I see them. I can see them actually. Does the food the bees eat affect the taste? You want me to quickly answer these?
Yeah, if you can see them.
I can see them. Yeah. In the chat, I hit the. I'm not very
Yeah,
good
the
at this,
last
but I
one,
quickly.
the last one I can see is Colin's question: does the food the bees eat affect the taste?
Yes, honey. Honey's like wine. I'm surprised that there's not more snobs when it comes to honey. My honey tastes different than my sister's honey or Jeannie's honey because there's different flowers around the float home. There's potato crops. There's a very interesting riparian zone there along the river where the flowers bloom earlier and they're actually they're in bloom later, but they're different types of flowers than you'd get in West Point Grey or that you get in Burnaby. And so the honey flavor is an amalgamation of all the flowers in the area. So no two honeys taste exactly the same. The example I gave you of fireweed, that's very unusual. That honey is made up of just one plant. And that is kind of for honey connoisseurs, you can get extra money for fireweed honey. It's really good. Anybody that knows anything about honey wants to get their hands on fireweed. There's Manuka honey made out of Manuka plants in Hawaii. You can get that, but it's very hard to get the bees just to harvest one type of flower. You've got to have, that's got to be the only flower in the area. Otherwise they just go harvest on their own. So the flavor is completely an amalgamation of the flowers that in the surrounding area, flowers and plants. And any other questions? We asked about mead. Well, okay, I think that the rest are just comments. Do you know that if you have enough bees, you can get exemption? We've covered that. Everybody else has been extremely complimentary, and I appreciate that very much, your encouragement and warm words.
The other comments at the beginning there, Audrey, were from the meeting.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for sharing that with us, Dave. It was most enjoyable.
Thank you.
I'll be putting a copy of the poster and your huge $50 honorarium and your thank you card in the mail to you. So you'll have to give me your mailing address.
I will do that. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dave.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Dave, and thanks, Elizabeth, for moderating our presentation. And now I guess Jack is going to come back in with, for those of you who wish to wait, Jack's going to come back in with a copy of the interview that he recently gave on, he and Sophie recently gave concerning the barn owl nest boxes. Jack, have you got that?
I am ready to go. Can you see that? I hope you can.
Yeah, looking good.
Looks
Looks
good.
biologist, and Jack McDonald, a member of the Delta Naturalist Society. And we wanted to talk today about barn owls in Delta. First of all, Sophie, I know you've been working with them since 2006, and you recently gave a presentation to the Delta Naturalist Society, which is available online. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, there was a specific slide that struck me in your barn owl presentation titled Pathways of Rat Poison to Target Predators, to Non-Target Predators, excuse me. And I feel like that's maybe an important piece of information that not everyone is aware of. Can you explain what happens with rodenticides, how it goes up the food chain with it?
Absolutely, Matt. So rodenticides work in that they are slow reacting, so it can take up to a week before, say, a rat or a house mouse feels any symptoms from eating the poison. And what can happen is that during that time between it's been eating the poison and feeling the symptoms, is that a rodent can get eaten by other predators, such as our local owls, our mammalian predators, coyotes, great blue herons. And essentially that's how it comes up the food chain, because the poison then will be transferred to the predator that eats the rodent.
Is that a bigger problem in urban environments or rural environments with the rodenticides?
That's a really good question. Actually, that's one thing I'm working on right now, is to try and tease that apart, because I guess you could say we're fortunate in that we have a really big database of exposure data for our raptors, at least that goes back to the 90s. And I'm referring to the Environment Canada's database. So right now, actually, one of my jobs is to be digitizing or mapping up all the locations and try and see, well, is this an issue for our more in urban areas, or do we also see this happening in our agricultural areas? We certainly, if you start looking around, we certainly do use quite a bit of rodenticides in an agricultural setting too, be it around perimeter of greenhouses, and also in fields sometimes to control field vole or field mouse outbreaks. So it's certainly used quite a bit there too. So it's a really interesting question. I really hope we can tease that apart in the next couple of months, actually.
So Jack, one of your group's parts in this has been with bird boxes, owl boxes specifically, that you have been putting up for a number of years, I think now, is that correct?
Yeah, I've been involved for about 4 years. It just started really casually. Somebody, a fellow by the name of Peter Ward, said, "Hey, do you want to come out and build some boxes?" I thought it was a good way to spend an afternoon or so, but it's turned into a little bit more than that, and we're building those, and Sophie finds places for us to put them, and it's been a real good partnership.
So Sophie, what makes a good place for a barn owl box specifically?
I also wanted to say that Jack and the crew, they're pretty good at finding their own sites now too. You guys have kind of branched out, but I guess in general, what we're looking for is, I mean, barn owls are an open grassland bird, so they do really well in Delta. And what we're looking for is these open grass fields, or even margins of grass around other crop fields or marshland, wetland areas. And what's neat with the barn owl is that if you put a box up, you can put it on an existing structure, such as a barn, or even inside riding arenas. Or you can also put the box on a pole, and they seem to find them, and they take to them and do I would arguably say do relatively well.
And it's basically just about making it a size that is appropriate, and they will just take up residence in them without much else happening. Is that correct?
Yeah, if we locate it near some habitat that their prey is going to live in, that's really, I think, one of the major keys is, and I've learned a little bit about that. We've got a couple out near the golf course, the Kings Links golf course, which has long roughs. You know, it's not a manicured course, so the voles live in that, and the owls like to live nearby where the prey is. So put a box up, and if the owls are around, they'll find it and nest in it.
Right on. Do you have an idea, Jack, how many boxes you guys have put up so far for owls?
Well, with the group that I've been involved, I think we've built around between 80 and 100 in the last 4 years. And then Sophie, as she said, has been working on it for 2006. So she put up a lot of old boxes years ago that was starting to wear out now and be replaced. So between those new installations and replacing old ones, we've got, I think, over 100 around the Lower Mainland right now.
Oh, that's impressive. And so, Sophie, I assume you keep a close eye on those boxes, and do you know how many of them are occupied at this time?
That's a really good question. I actually, Jack and the Cascade Box Group they also do quite a bit of monitoring, but I'd say the occupancy, if I was going to give an estimate, is about 85 to 90%, which is really encouraging because barn owls are a threatened species in British Columbia, and they're only found in southwestern BC. So it's neat to be able to help them in particular too, because they are experiencing a lot of direct habitat loss in our region. So whatever we can do to prevent that is always very gratifying, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
There's one other aspect to it, and I've certainly learned a lot in this last 4 years, especially from Sophie and from Peter. So we'll look at places that's got nice grass habitat, but located near a busy road, within a kilometer of a busy road like the Highway 99. And barn owls, when they're hunting at night or at dusk, they fly quite low, and they're quite prone to being hit by traffic. So that's another criteria that we're trying not to locate them near busy highways.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jack. It's a really good point. This time of year, I unfortunately pick up about a barn owl a week from 99. I try and collect them because we do ban the owlets, the young batches, and it's a good way to do monitoring. For example, last week I picked up a barn owl from Highway 99 in South Surrey that was banded in Chilliwack in 2020. So it's certainly, we do have criteria as far as highways. So if we are putting them on properties, we want to make sure that they're not using rodenticides too, because you want to, in some ways, the barn owls are there to help you with your rodent problems. So we do not want to poison the owls in the process.
No, of course. And that was another thing, Sophie, I wanted to mention was, I know you mentioned also in your talk about working with berry farmers in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what that means?
I've been working with them on how to basically reduce the dependency on rodenticides. I mean, voles can fluctuate. I mean, people, I guess an analogy would be lemmings. People think of, masses of lemmings. Voles have some of the same behavioral traits in that they do fluctuate a lot in their population, and sometimes you get an invasion of voles. Farmers are unfortunately left with very little choices on how to control them. So, but we are really trying to kind of move away from rodenticides being the first line of defense to it being the absolute last resort. Essentially, relying more on habitat management to deter voles from fields and encouraging raptors, a natural predator of voles. I mean, barn owls and our Cooper's hawk, our northern harriers, they eat a lot of voles in 1 year. So if instead getting farmers to rely on our natural predators and focusing more on management, and has been one of my key kind of goals with this project.
Is there anything that people can do on a more individual level as a homeowner, or, you know, in the urban environments that might help in those areas?
Absolutely. I think, again, it's sort of a similar line of defense when it comes to rodent control. Do not use rodenticides if you can avoid it. Focus on preventative measures so that these rodenticides are not applied into our environment, because they do go up the food chain.
Okay. Jack, I'd like to bring you back in. I know we were speaking before we started about your group's work with the city of Delta and how things have been making a positive shift towards being more ecologically minded. There are some new initiatives that the city has taken on. They've become a bat-friendly city and pollinator-friendly city. And you must be very pleased to see things taking a shift in that direction.
Yeah, it's really good. I know that the Delta Naturalist has been putting a lot of work into that area over the last 2 or 3 years with the birds and biodiversity initiative that the city has put into place, and the recent bat-friendly city declaration that is a direct result of that. So we're pretty pleased about that. And there may be some opportunity for our group to expand into building bat boxes. We're just starting to explore that now.
Terrific. I think that's a lot of terrific information. I wish we had more time, but that's it. Thank you both very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay.
Well, there you go. So apparently that was aired on Delta or Eastlink last Thursday. I'm not a cable subscriber, so I can't verify that, but maybe somebody else saw it. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jack, for sharing that with us. That was very interesting. Great exposure for the owls. We're more or less on our own time here. Folks may have questions for you or other members of the Cascade Group about the Barn Owl program. If so, fire away, folks.
Fire away. Hearing none.
Hearing none.
It's getting late.
Yep. Thanks again, Jack.
Oh, you're welcome.
For showing both of those clips. Thanks everybody for attending. We'll look forward to doing this again next month. Different agenda, different speaker, of course. But next month, Elizabeth, just remind us who the speaker is next month, please.
Yes, it's Martin Gregus Jr. again. He's a great young photographer, and he's doing something on polar bears. I will have to confirm with him what exactly he's doing, but I know it's polar bears.
Oh, neat. Yeah, we're indebted to Elizabeth for lining up all these great speakers, and she's got a full agenda right through our June Zoom meeting. So first Tuesday of the month, of course, is our meeting, and I believe it falls on the 6th of April. And indeed, that will represent the handoff between Audrey and I. Audrey will be in the chair for the second quarter of this calendar year. So enjoy the onset of spring, everybody, in March, and we'll see you in a month's time, roughly a month's time. Good night.
Good night, Sid. Good night, everyone.